Welcome everyone to this episode of Science Conversations here at NTNU, where we are diving into a variety of topics, all relevant to researchers and academics alike, and especially the younger guard. Today's lovely topic is about science, politics, and university sector funding. My name is Ben David Norman, and I'm looking forward to hosting this session. And if you're thinking, what? Is there politics in science? Then you have come just to the right place, because I got some real experts with me in the panel today, all here to enlighten us on this delicate issue. Or if you're more of the pragmatic sort, simply here to learn how to milk the cow, so to speak, well, you come to the right place. Of course, we're going to address that question as well, how to obtain funding. And I'm really glad to not be here alone. That would be very lonely, for one thing, but also I think I got more questions than I have answers myself. So on the panel today, a couple of representatives from the younger crowd, Marius and Francesca. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you for joining.
Good to be here.
And the final guest, Bernd Erik, a warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you very much.
You would be more of the veteran in the game, I suppose.
Definitely so.
That's good. And I think we better just dive straight into it. So, first of all, politics and science? Is there any connection whatsoever there? And I don't know, Marius, you're the Humanoria representative here today, right? But it's still not politics. I mean, you're not a politician, right? And with all your exciting research and everything, why on earth would you care about politics and science?
Well, first I should say this is not my own research field, but I do have a lot of colleagues that do research on science and science politics. And I think maybe the first sort of important lesson is that there is always a connection between science and society. What's happening in society is also going to be reflected in science and science funding. So there's like this kind of back and forth relationship, because what we do research on also informs society, and that also, of course, politics is informed by or implicated by what's happening in society. So that's sort of the first sort of lesson of the research field that I'm representing, which is called Science, Technology, and Society, is that there is a relationship between science and society.
Right, so you sort of have an interest there through your research field, actually.
Yeah.
But what about can we call you a hardcore scientist in terms of your fields? I mean, biodiversity, is there any connection with politics in your fields?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think there's through all different layers from international to national and subnational. So, I mean, for one thing, I mean, what is something that is very important for my research is sort of like, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. So they were like going up right to the top of like United Nations and these sort of like, agreements there, also like the biodiversity targets and the Kunming-Montreal agreement and so on and so forth. And that somehow, that does reflect into politics, because there's targets that, Norway also wants to reach, and that we need research for being able to solve them. So that is then when science sort of is meeting the politics and what are the needs of politics and decision-making, maybe more broadly. And how can research help to try and address these? That's, I think, what is relevant for my research.
That's very interesting. And I have to make some amendment. When I said hardcore scientist, I was not suggesting that you're not doing real science. I meant the hard sciences, as
Thank
they
you,
are
Ben.
often
Thank you.
called. My apologies. But what about you, Bernd Erik? What's your perspective on this?
Of course, science is a part of politics, because and in particular, the field that we are doing research in, which is about conservation of biological diversity. And it's unanimously agreed that the crisis we are living in now is caused by human interventions. And that is, of course, caused by the politics that we are choosing. So this is very closely related. The other thing that is important to also remember is that research and science is a part of the society, and the society is driven by political decisions. So we are definitely a part of the political system and are strongly affected by that.
That's interesting. So actually, all you guys find an entrance into the political aspect also through your fields, like you say, with global warming or a climate crisis, etc. But then again, as an umbrella for all of this, of course, in a system where you are distributing resources, for instance, monetary such, then there should be some regulations coming with this.
Oh yeah.
Also called politics.
Yeah, and I think since a lot of the funding is coming, from the government essentially, or governments, or also Europe, Horizon Europe and things, that's also sort of like from taxes. So I do think we also have a bit of a responsibility to try and give something back in a sense. I mean, if this is very directly with sort of things that they can be implemented, or if it's more like basic research that takes time to mature, both are very, very valuable. But I think, there is a need for us also to do things that are sort of needed. And that's why I think it's very important to pay attention a little bit to what is needed actually. So that, it doesn't mean that you only have to do research on what is now politically hot, but I think it definitely shapes the research, because of course it also shapes the calls that are out and things like that. But I think it is also a responsibility to try and help politics and decision makers to evolve, to make the future better.
So are you suggesting that politics in some sense is also part of shaping the kind of research we are doing at the universities?
I think so, yeah, because by announcing the calls and by saying, well, we want to fund these and these and these things, they do shape a bit the direction in which research can go at the moment. It doesn't mean that it's only going in this direction, but it does have an influence on the type of projects that are sort of running, and the type of, also outcomes and results that are coming out from that.
Right. And you, very interestingly, you mentioned government, and then you said governments. And I think we'll have to go back to that, the differences there in between Norway and the other countries. Bernt Erik.
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprise foreigners the most when they are coming to Norway and working in Norwegian science is that there is so strong connection between the political life and the scientific community, because in contrast, in very many other countries, we have a strong ministerial funding of research. So each ministry, they have their own research priorities and aspects that they think are most important that we are doing research on. That means that we are, as scientists, we are dependent on relating to the calls that these decisions really represent and causes.
Right. I'm not sure I quite understood. Are you saying that there is a difference between the way that this is governed here in Norway and in other countries?
Yeah, it is in many countries. You have very, very strong academic institutions with very, very high budget, which can fund their research almost independently of what the politicians decides. That's not the case in Norway, because a lot of our funding is determined by the Research Council, which get their grants, or what you can call their budgets, from the ministries. In other countries, you have huge private-like funding that can fund substantial amount of research. You have also other organizations, for instance, like the Royal Society in UK, which funds quite a considerable amount of research. These things we have much less of in Norway.
What do you guys make of that? Is that a bad thing or a good thing? The fact that, if I get you right, the science and politics is in that sense more strongly related in Norway compared to, for instance, the EU then?
Well, I think it can be a good thing on the one hand because Norway is a small country, so it's relatively easy to understand what's happening in the in the government sphere, in a sense that we understand. I mean, we have visits from the ministers once in a while. We kind of understand what they're concerned about, and that can help us to place ourselves in a way that make us more relevant. Because at the end of the day, it's mainly about relevance. How can we be relevant for for society, and what is considered relevant at the moment, and that changes all the time, right? By, for example, new governments coming in and political changes.
But isn't that also then a possible pitfall that science becomes too relevant for society? Like, just considering Einstein, riding along a light beam, didn't seem very relevant at the moment. Do you guys think that?
I mean, I think there needs to be room for sort of like more this basic science and things, but I think there are these tools, like, there's like Toppforsk and these kind of things where you have much more freedom. And I mean, being in Norway doesn't mean that you're limited to Norwegian funding. I mean, there are calls like from Europe, Horizon Europe at the moment, for example, Biodiversa, which is one thing that is also relevant for us. So I mean, there are other calls that are, that you are able to sort of send in applications as well, being in Norway, but which are not Norwegian money. So I think, you do have a bit of flexibility to see, like, where could the research be funded from? And Norway is only one of the sources. But I agree, like, there's no big, like, these private funders. That's not really the case in Norway. But I still think there is some flexibility for, like, getting funding from different sources in that sense.
That's good to hear, but that makes me wonder, though, and perhaps this is more to the veteran in the game, I don't know, please fill in and everyone, but has this always been the case, or does this have with Norway's history to do?
I think in Norway, in this country, compared to other countries, we haven't thought that very fundamental, deeply dig academic tradition. I think the basic rationale for doing research in Norway is that it should produce goods and resources and improve the Norwegian society and make the conditions better for the people living there. I think that's a part of our tradition, that we have this background. And this is in contrast to other countries, that has a very long tradition with university and academic society, and where there is a much more integrated culture of the society.
Yeah, I can also maybe add, I mean, I was talking to one of my colleagues, a historian, who has done research on the history of the Norwegian Research Council. And he said that, so, I mean, compared to other countries, most other countries have several research councils. We in Norway now, we have just one, but that's only since 1993. Before that, we had several research councils as well. And starting after the Second World War, we had one research council that was focusing mainly on developing research on nuclear research, basically. And after that, things developed and became also influenced by other things. And one curious thing he mentioned was that a lot of the research was funded by lottery funding back in the day, because there was a lot of extra funding that came through that, and then there was an agreement that would go to fund research. So
I hope that didn't make those who got the funding, and that was not like the lottery, though. So they didn't hear it, the structure. But this is really intriguing. So it sounds like Norway's history somehow has caused at least some sense of austerity in terms of funding. But is that, I mean, given all this, and also taking away just the fact that, I once thought I would become a scientist because I would do science, right? But then I have to teach, I have administrative duties, and now you guys are adding politics into it as well, right? So what are your general advices, given all this, in terms of maintaining a balanced life as an academic in the midst of all this? Any general advices to PhDs, postdocs, myself for that matter?
I think it's very important, even at a very early stage of a scientific career, to perceive a little bit where one consider one may be in, let's say, 10 years. I think one of the things that we have to relate to in Norway, and that's not just negatively, is that we have to try to get be attractive for different funding sources. And therefore you must have some sort of overall perspective, what you really would like to achieve as a scientist. I think that's very important. And I think one of the biggest challenges for younger scientists is that they don't realize how fast the time is passing. And that's very important to be aware of, in my view.
I completely agree. I think it's important to have a bit of a vision, almost, where do you want to go? But I also think it's important that this vision is sort of broad enough that it allows you to sort of have different almost pillars, because there is this change, that you're not just focusing on one very specific aspect, but you have some different legs almost to stand on. So once there is a bit more funding related to this aspect, and you find funding for this part, and you have another thing that you can work on, or another one. So I mean that you should not lose sort of the goal or the vision out of, you should not forget about it, but you have to have different parts on how you can advance it. I mean, in my case, for example, everything is related to sort of impacts on biodiversity. But I do this with sort of how is energy systems affecting this, and what is the future of this, or sort of really developing core methods, which is a completely different type of funding, or applying it, trying to make decision makers see what they need to do, which again is something completely different. And I think combining these different legs is allowing me always to sort of advance in one of the aspects. And that gives also, to some sense, a little bit, in a way, a bit stability, that I always have something where I can hopefully find funding.
So science, I mean, politics and science, it sounds a bit like that's broadening your perspectives. It's causing you to have to take your first steps and then find the balance on different legs.
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to sort of, and then of course, when you're doing your PhD, then I mean, you have to have some depth as well. So I mean, then you should focus on what you're actually doing. But after the PhD, I think it's quite important to try and broaden out a little bit. Don't just stay on this one topic that you have done your research on, but what are related topics that you can branch out? What are maybe other methods or other applications of your method or whatever, to sort of have a bit of broader view.
And that's why it's so important to get out when you are a postdoc, to get this distant perspective on what actually Norway is, because that also make you much better to identify what is the strength of the Norwegian system when you're hopefully coming back.
So what is the strength of the Norwegian system, if you were to sum it up very quickly?
The strength of the Norwegian system is that you have many alternative funding sources. You have a tradition in Norway that, for instance, management agencies, for instance, in the environment, really fund research. You have different ministries funding research, and then you have also this possibility for this curiosity-driven research. So you have quite a broad platform, given that your overall perspective of your research are sufficiently broad.
Right. So keep your perspectives and go abroad to obtain new perspectives. And finally, though, is there a way we as researchers, and especially for the younger gods, that we can affect science politics in Norway? How do we sort of train ourselves to become effective tools in shaping science politics in Norway as researchers?
I don't think that is very easy. It's not like a direct path to shape and influence research policy in general. But what I think I can mention, in addition to the things that have been mentioned already, is the value of your colleagues and maybe even a mentor. Because I don't think I would have achieved any of the things that I have without my colleagues. Because they, in many cases, they have advised me about things. They have tipped me about calls, but also they have been invited to something, but they didn't have time to participate. And then they said, maybe this would be something for you. And then I participated in it, and I got a little bit of experience and a little bit of, and that's extremely important. Mm-hmm. So the question is, as a PhD candidate, how much do you engage with your colleagues? Because it might seem that the most important is just finish your PhD and get things done, but it could be very smart to engage in your community, in your department, with your colleagues, to get to know them. But and also the thing about an international mentor has also been very useful. So go abroad, go do a research stay somewhere, and get to know someone there a little bit better that might be able to see things from the outside and give you some tips.
I can only second that. I think it's having like colleagues and sort of like mentors that can help you and give you advice. I think that is really, really, really important. Exactly the same thing. I think, I had so many good supervisors and mentors along the way that could really help and shaped me in this way as well, and give me very valuable feedback. So I think this is really a message to the younger guard. So look for such a mentor. I mean, you don't have to contact big shot somewhere else that you don't know. I mean, it's okay if it's somewhere you know and trust. I think that's the most important thing. You have to have someone that you feel you can just ping pong your ideas back and forth without sort of like having to be on your guard all the time. And it's also a call to the older people, to be these mentors. It does take time, but it's invaluable for the younger ones. So I really think that, the older generation in that sense should take the time to mentor the younger ones. And I think in my experience, that has worked very well. So I think I'm very glad to have had that help that I had.
Great to hear. So that also emphasizes the point that the group or the immediate situation in which you find yourself is actually quite important. Again, bringing us back to the fact that you might want to go abroad at some point to broaden your perspectives. And mentorship, that was a call both to the younger to find a mentor and to the older ring foxes in the game. Perhaps you should be that mentor. Now, folks, I think it's time to get a bit more personal. You see, we have to talk about this with university funding. And I would be very, very curious. For instance, Francesca, how did you obtain funding?
I got funding from different sources. So, I had like the very first project that I got when I was here was from the Research Council of Norway. Since then, I had several. And then I got then an ERC starting grant. So that was then really going into the European arena in that sense.
So what was the story behind that? Was that a long walk to get there?
Sort of. It didn't take such a long time to write because I think I had quite a good idea. Then I applied. I got to the interview stage, but I didn't get the project in the first round. Basically because they said it was too ambitious. So I wanted to do too much. So then I reapplied and basically took out one work package and reapplied again. And again got to the interview stage, and then the second round, then I got it.
Was that the same round or same?
It's the same panel, basically the same sort of, because you don't have calls, right? For the ERC, you can submit whatever you want to these different panels, and you just have to find the right panel, and you can also indicate like secondary panels, because my research in industrial ecology is sort of like a little bit across panels. I selected one main one, and then I had two sort of sub-panels that were sort of like related a bit to it. So, and that worked out fine. So that was good. So, yeah, then that was, and I think it was an amazing experience. Also the first time, even though I didn't get it, I had a bit of a feeling that I wouldn't get it. Because of the questions that I asked about, the level of ambitions, and so maybe I just was a bit overshooting there. So I was really trying to find this balance. But that worked out, I think, in the end. So that's going on now. And I also got funding from Horizon Europe, so I'm coordinating 2 projects there as well. So I think this is really a stepwise growing a little bit as well. So like having this individual grant, but then also trying myself a bit as a coordinator now for these grants on a European level.
So please just take us very quickly through the differences. You're talking about the ERC, right? And then
yes,
the Horizon
there's
Europe.
the ERC. There's like starting grant, consolidated grant, and advanced grant.
That's all within the ERC.
That's all within the ERC. So that's depending on how long ago you finish your PhD. So 3 to 7 years is a ERC grant, then 7 to I think 12 years is a consolidated, and after 12 it's an advanced grant. And Erik also knows about that. Mm-hmm. He just got one. and this is all about excellence. So it's all about just your CV and your own research idea in whatever you imagine. While Horizon Europe in general, that's sort of the framework program. And there they have like different calls, normal sort of like calls in different, disciplines or whatever. And you more or less like you do when you apply for the research council, you react to these calls and you try to answer the objectives and questions that are set out in these calls. And there's many, many of them. So the 2 projects that I got are both within sort of transformative change for biodiversity, but within 2 different calls within that frame.
Right.
Yeah.
Then I think I got a bit more of the details now. I think this could actually be a good time to bring in a bit more knowledge about the ERC. Now listen to this.
The ERC is a truly wonderful program as it funds researcher-driven frontier research in any field. Scientific excellence is the sole evaluation criteria, and the aim is to open up new horizons for research, contributing to solving the grand challenges, the unresolved scientific questions. The downside is that it is rather competitive. Still, this should not keep you from applying. More and more NTNU researchers are applying for an ERC grant. Many make it to the finals, and some also eventually get a grant. The ERC is mainly funding individual researchers in building a team around them. And there are 3 categories of individual ERC grants: starting grants, consolidated grants, and advanced grants, depending on when you got your PhD degree. There is also the ERC Synergy Grant, supporting groups of up to 4 researchers working together. And there are yearly calls for all 4 categories of ERC grants. If you are interested in applying for an ERC grant, please contact the e-advisor at your faculty. The e-advisors have a lot of knowledge about the ERC. Also, NTNU is offering ERC workshops on how to write a competitive ERC proposal. We are organizing ERC reading days, where you get to read previous successful ERC proposals, and we offer support from experienced ERC consultants. If you make it to the finals, we'll set up interview training for you and organize mock interviews. The project idea is everything when it comes to the ERC. It needs to be bold, needs to be high risk, high gain. So good luck with your ERC proposal.
Wow, that was a lot of information. It's good to know that the administration is there to help out if you want to apply for the ERC, which this was specifically about. But Erik, what's your story of funding?
Yeah, I have a background at an applied research institute, NINA, before I started at the university. And there we had funding from the directorates and the ministries, and not so much from the Research Council. My first project after starting at the university was an EU project, not an ERC, but a traditional EU project with 7 partners in different European countries. And that network, that was in 1998, that network is still operating and has been a continuous flow of collaboration and interaction. So for me, this project was a game changer. It really made a platform for my research.
That was still being at NINA, is that what you said?
No, that was after I started at university. That was the first project I got after starting at the university.
Right, and that network you kept with yourself. Yeah. That's good. And the ERC, would you recommend applying for the ERC or the RCN, the Norwegian Research Council, or what would your recommendations be?
One of the things that annoys me the most is that people saying that you are wasting so much time writing proposal. I think that's something of the most important thing you do, because then you have to sit down, think, do analysis, trying to convince yourself, and through that also the reviewers that you are really doing something smart. And I think if you don't have this process in a busy working everyday life, you won't take the time for that. So I think that's very important. Go for the most competitive areas and get feedback. That's my strongest advice.
Good. That's challenging, but it sounds like a good path. And I also wonder then, because I think you mentioned, Francesca, that you got the RCN grant first. Is that right?
A normal project from the Research Council, yeah.
The Research Council of Norway, right?
Yes,
yeah.
That's the first project that I got.
And perhaps I missed the details, but was that also true for you?
No, that I didn't get that. It was after I got that EU project that we got this RCN funding. So the first year after I starting at the university, we were not successful. But then we got this EU funding, and that then made us competitive in the Research Council. And that's the way it has been all the time. We have gone from RCN to ERC and back to RCN, and also got other more applied funding. So we have had all the time different feet to stand on.
So there is a correlation then. It seems that if you get the ERC, then you're more likely to get the RCN, and probably vice versa as well. What do you make of that?
That's the way it should be, I think, because if you prove competitive within one highly competitive area, it will flow automatically over to the other, I think. And that's I think it's. I think it's very important to try to position oneself for these arenas. Then this can be used to get more funding for more applied problems. Everything fits together. It must be in a country like Norway. You have to have different feet to stand on.
Great. Marius, finally, what's your story of funding? Is that different from what we have heard, or is it kind of the same?
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit different, because I started out trying to apply for the Norwegian Research Council, and I applied for this FriPro, the open research funding, where I got rejected 3 times first with the same project idea. I was tweaking it, and I got better marks every year, but I never got funded. But then I thought, like, the last time, I was like, either I have to give up on this idea and the idea is not good enough, or I try to go up one step. But then I tried to apply for the ERC, and then I got a starting grant there the first time I applied. And probably the reason that it was successful the first time is because I had all those rounds before through the Research Council, where I was kind of honing the idea and improving the idea a little bit as well. And I think that, no one really recommended me to apply for the ERC because it seemed impossible. And I went to a couple of these seminars about how to apply for the ERC, where the advice was that you had to have the most brilliant idea. It needs to be fantastic. If you don't have a good idea, just forget about it. It needs to be, all these keywords about, it has to be excellent, And I thought that there is no point for me to apply for that because my idea is not really excellent. And I personally don't think I'm particularly smart or anything like that. So I thought this is not for me. But then I went to this proposal reading day where I read the proposals that had been successful. And I just got 2 proposals that I could read. And those 2 proposals, I thought, well, this actually is something that I could also write. It's not like this is the most insane, impressive idea I've seen in my life. It was just like, they use regular words and they build the sentences in simple ways. And I'm like, okay, this actually, I can do this too. So after I went to that, I decided to try to apply. And I got help from Nina Sindre as well, who we just saw on the video. In the end, it went well.
Wow, that's encouraging to hear. If they can do it, you can do it as well.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's true for me as well, and you as well. But tell us a bit more, though, about the proposal reading day. Is that what you call it? What's that all about?
It's an offer that I think all the universities have. I think it's actually organized by the Research Council. And they get proposals from successful ERC projects, the starting grants and advanced grants and consolidator grants. So you can choose which grant you want to read, and also you can choose the topics with social sciences and humanities. You only get to choose 2, and you go into a confined space, a room, where they hand out the prints of these projects. It's really strict. And you have to give back that print at the end of the day or after a couple of hours, something like that. So
what's the reason behind that?
I'm not sure, actually, because every time someone asked me if I could share my proposal, I sent it to them.
Yeah, but then you are sharing voluntarily.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
in these reading days, I mean, I don't know how many people will read my proposal now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I would just want to give them my full proposal. So I mean, it has something to do with confidentiality. I mean, these proposals, they're still in progress. I mean, the research projects are running. So I mean, you don't want to just everything in a way just be
That's
out
true.
there and copy it.
Yeah.
So I think it's very different. If someone asks me directly and I know this person, then of course I would sort of like in most cases just like, yeah, fine, no problem at all, you can read it, but I wouldn't just send it out randomly to people, which is a little bit what happens in these reading days, because also someone from universities can read it that I don't even know. So I think it's good that they are relatively strict on this, because then it's easier for me also to say like, sure, give it to these reading days, that's perfectly fine, because I know the idea will not go further.
Yeah, no one will steal your idea or your project somehow. That makes a lot of sense, and I think it's also interesting to hear what you said, Bernt-Erik, that because it was said in the video that the downside is that it's very competitive, but in some sense that's also a positive thing. You could use it to excel in your field by getting all this feedback. And now, as you say, it's not impossible also with the ERC.
Excellence is not something you are; it's something you become. It's something that when I got that ERC project, I became excellent. So because I was defined into that system by NTNU, then of course you have to play along and play the game. But of course, the idea itself that I had, that was my dream project. That was something I thought about for a long time, and I think it is a good idea. But you never know if that is going to be at the top of the research frontier, or so you just have to try. You just have to try and build your dream project and your idea and submit it to the ERC.
Wow, that's absolutely intriguing. So Bernt-Erik.
Yes, in my first ERC project, it was an error in an equation, and I was completely sure that this was not funded, because I discovered it before the decision day. 2 other reviewers spotted it, and still this project was funded. The project that we got now was, as usual, submitted some years ago. Very concrete impacts, which made us revise it, and still there was problem with experimental designs, But another time, we got it because they enjoyed the idea. So I think what you say is that it's about excellence, but I think you also get, both in the Research Council and in the ERC, you get a reward for being really stimulating for the reviewers and engagement, and I believe in what you are doing is very important.
Right. So believe in what you're doing,
Yeah.
and excellence is something. Excellent is something you become, as was said here. Good, but then RCN, ERC, Horizon, whatever. What would you recommend, like, to the young researchers? What should they? It sounds like we shouldn't confine ourselves to only think about the RCN, at least.
No, you should definitely not confine yourself. But I think it also depends a lot on the setting. I mean, you know, for a young researcher, are you applying for something alone? Do you have a network that you want to apply with? Because that changes everything. I mean, if you're alone, well, then basically either it's a ERC or it's a young research talent or something like this. If you have a network or an idea that you want to collaborate on really with partners that also need funding and so on and so forth, then it's either a Research Council call or it's Horizon Europe. But in both cases, you have to look at the calls. You know, you can't just say, I'm going to apply there. You have to see, what are the calls? Does it fit? Does my idea fit into what they actually want at this point in time? I think that is, again, back to the politics a little bit. You know, that is what is driving it. That will ultimately decide, will you go there or will you go there? And again, I think also there, if you're young, try maybe to sort of tag along with other ones, you know, so to have more experience. For these Horizon Europe projects, they're big. You know, they're like, I'm coordinating for the first time. I'm slightly overwhelmed sometimes, but I think it's I learn a lot, but I think it was very helpful that in the writing stage there was also, in both proposals, an older person involved who didn't coordinate, but who I could really use a bit of as a sparring partner, and that helped again a lot. So sort of like the mentoring again a little bit. And I think that makes it also possible, you know, to dare to go for it, even at a relatively young age.
Good.
And there is one thing I think, I don't know whether it's typical Norwegian, but I think that people wait too long before they're applying, because there are different levels in the ERC, so that you cannot apply before you have, you have to be, I think, 7 years after your...
3 to 7.
Yeah, and the people, they think they get it the first time, but you usually don't get it the first time. That makes it difficult for them to get through for a second round. So you should start to apply as early as possible. As soon as you have your idea, whether your CV is not perfect or whatsoever, apply, get feedback, so you can get another time, another attempt.
That's encouraging to hear. And very, very quickly in the end, how does one write a successful application, if there is one advice you would like to give?
Maybe I can give, my main advice is to use your colleagues and basically have a lot of people read your idea and get feedback on it. And I was so lucky to have good colleagues who helped me out and read my stuff and gave me feedback all the time, many, many times. So that was really useful.
So don't get stuck alone.
Yes,
No.
Completely agree.
That's very important.
That's the key.
That's the key. Well, let's make that the end. I'm sorry, but time's up. It has been very intriguing and educating for me personally, and I hope you enjoyed being part of the show. Also, thank you for following Science Conversations back from the sofa or wherever you are seated. Science Conversations is what you have been following, and remember that by Googling Science Conversations at NTNU, you can now find all previous episodes uploaded to our web pages online. I think I would like to end by what Mario said: if they can do it, I can do it as well. My name is Ben David Norman, and it has been a pleasure hosting.